For decades, Johnny Cash captivated the world with his voice, his raw honesty, and his battles with darkness. But even as the spotlight followed him, one truth remained hidden, locked away in a private drawer inside the Tennessee home he shared with his beloved wife, June Carter Cash. She never spoke of it, never mentioned it to the press, not even to their children. Only after her passing, 20 years later, did someone stumble upon it, an old tape, unlabeled, undated, and what was on it would rewrite everything we thought we knew about the man in black. Because this wasn't for the world, this was for her. And what happens next will change how you remember Johnny Cash forever. Long before the hidden tape was ever recorded, there was a love story, imperfect, intense, and unforgettable. Johnny Cash was a man spiraling through the chaos of fame and addiction in the 1960s. He had the world at his feet, but nothing grounding him beneath it. He'd vanish for days, sometimes weeks. His demons came in the form of pills, loneliness, and the haunting silence after a concert crowd disappeared. But then came June Carter, not as a savior draped in romance, but as a storm of her own, strong-willed, deeply spiritual, and unafraid to confront the mess he had become. She didn't run from his darkness. She walked straight into it with a flashlight. Their relationship wasn't simple. June didn't fall for the myth of Johnny Cash. She saw the boy from Dyess, Arkansas, hiding behind the voice, aching for peace. She challenged him, comforted him, fought with him, forgave him. When he landed in jail, she bailed him out. When he collapsed from drugs, she held his hand until the fever broke. And when he stood on stage trembling from withdrawal, she stood just off stage, praying. The world saw their chemistry in songs like Jackson and It Ain't Me, Babe. But behind the curtain, they were two people clinging to each other through storms the public never heard about. Johnny once said, "I was in a fire, but she walked through it with me." And that was the essence of their bond. Not perfect, but unbreakable. When he proposed to her live on stage in 1968, it wasn't just a show. It was desperation laced with devotion. He needed her like he needed oxygen, and she knew it. She didn't just love him, she kept him alive. Her presence steadied his hands and softened his heart. In many ways, she was the quiet editor behind the legend, shaping, trimming, protecting the Johnny Cash we all came to admire. That's why, when he asked her to record him on that ordinary day years later, she didn't ask why. She just pressed record. Because loving Johnny meant holding on to his soul even when he wasn't sure what to do with it. And what that tape captured was the rawest, most fragile moment of a man trying to make peace with his past, his love, and whatever time he had left. It wasn't planned, it wasn't rehearsed. It happened in the stillness of an ordinary day. A day with no concerts, no cameras, no fans. Just the quiet hum of the Tennessee countryside and the creak of floorboards in the Cash family home. Johnny wasn't in performance mode. He wasn't dressed in black. He wasn't holding court for anyone. He was just a man who'd lived 1,000 lives and knew he was nearing the final chapter. That morning, he had barely spoken. He moved slowly through the house, his hands swollen with age, his breath a little more labored than usual. June noticed. She always did. She made him tea. He asked her to bring the little handheld tape recorder, the same one they sometimes used to capture song ideas or late-night melodies. She didn't question it. She placed it on the table beside him. He stared at it for a long time, as if deciding whether to even go through with it. Then, with one shaky hand, he pressed the record button. What followed was not a song. It wasn't a demo or a letter or a goodbye. It was something that lived between all of those things, something harder to define. A confession, a memory, a private storm released into the safety of her presence. His voice came low and uneven. He called her name softly, June, and paused. Then he spoke about love, about failure, about how many times he felt he let her down. He talked about the nights on the road where he almost didn't come back, about the pills that made him forget who he was, about the guilt that never left him for the time he missed with their children. And then, just as quickly, he shifted, singing a broken verse of an old hymn, then stopping midway, caught in the emotion. He'd start a thought, lose it, then pick it back up again. Like a man sorting through the attic of his own heart, June sat beside him the entire time, silent, listening, not as a wife, but as a witness to the soul of the man she loved. She knew this wasn't meant for the world. This was Johnny as he truly was. No spotlight, no mask. Just a man trying to leave a piece of himself behind, not in gold records or Grammy speeches, but in his voice, raw, cracked, uncertain, speaking only to her. When he finished, he didn't ask her what she thought. He didn't ask her to keep it or destroy it. He just looked at her, eyes heavy with something she never spoke about, and nodded once. She picked up the recorder, stopped the tape, and tucked it away. And neither of them ever mentioned it again. June Carter Cash had been around fame her entire life. Born into the legendary Carter family dynasty, she had seen what the spotlight could do, how it brightened the stage and burned the soul. She'd watched musicians rise, fall, and be devoured by the very industry that once celebrated them. So when she made the quiet decision to hide that tape, wrap it in linen, slide it into a carved wooden box, and tuck it in the back of a drawer, she wasn't just acting on impulse. She was protecting something sacred. She knew what was on that tape wasn't for the world's ears. It wasn't meant for critics, fans, or awards. It was a man's last attempt to speak honestly, stripped of ego, stripped of performance, and it was hers, only hers. Johnny never said, "Don't show anyone." He didn't need to. June could feel the weight of the moment, the way his voice shook, the way he said her name like it was a prayer. She understood that some things are too fragile to share with the world, especially when that world only knows how to consume and dissect. What was recorded that day wasn't a product. It was love in its rawest form. And love, real love, deserves to be protected. She placed the tape inside that drawer like a secret prayer folded in half, knowing she might never listen to it again. But she also knew it couldn't be destroyed. It held too much. His regrets, his hopes, his memories. It held the version of Johnny Cash the world would never see, the one only she knew. And maybe, deep down, she believed the time would come when the world could hear it. But only when they were ready, only when the noise of the world was quiet enough to truly listen. Those close to her, family, staff, friends, say she never spoke of the tape again. It wasn't listed in her will. It wasn't filed with their other archives. It simply existed in silence, guarded not by security systems, but by her love and intuition. Some say she feared what the public might do with it. Others say she was waiting for the right moment, a sign, a purpose. But those who knew her best believe it was simpler than that. June kept it because it was the purest moment she ever shared with him. Not on stage, not at the altar, not in interviews, but right there, in their home, as the sun poured through the window, and the man she loved gave her his last true song. A song not meant for applause, a song meant only for her heart. June Carter Cash passed away on May 15, 2003. Her death left a silence in Johnny's life that even music couldn't fill. For nearly 4 decades, she had been his compass, his anchor, the one voice that could reach him when the noise of the world became too loud. And now she was gone. Those who were close to him said something in Johnny dimmed overnight. His health, already fragile, began to deteriorate rapidly. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was often only about her. He would sit in his chair and stare out the window for hours. He played old recordings of her voice, sometimes letting them loop until dawn. There were moments where he'd hold the carved wooden box, gently, reverently, just holding it, never opening it. Some nights he'd set it beside him while he played his guitar, never saying a word about what was inside. It was as if the tape had become her ghost, present, silent, and too precious to disturb. 4 months later, on September 12, 2003, Johnny Cash died in a Nashville hospital. His passing was mourned around the world. Presidents made statements. Radio stations played tribute marathons. Fans lit candles outside his home. But inside that house, in a quiet drawer no one dared open, the tape remained untouched. After the funeral, the Cash children began the slow, emotional process of going through their parents' belongings. But when they came to that drawer, the one June always kept locked, they paused. It felt sacred, off limits, and so they didn't open it. Not then, not for years. The house was eventually preserved. Memorabilia lined the halls. Tour groups passed through carefully guided paths, but that drawer remained sealed. Dust gathered. Time passed, and the tape inside lay in silence, waiting. Some in the family whispered about it. Others forgot it existed. But none of them could bring themselves to disturb it, because it wasn't just a tape. It was a piece of two souls, sealed in time. It wasn't catalogued with the rest of Johnny's archives. It wasn't mentioned in any estate planning. It simply waited, like a secret too tender for the noise of the world. For nearly 20 years, it remained a mystery, until one day, someone finally slid that drawer open. In early 2023, 2 decades after Johnny and June had passed, the Cash estate finally approved a full archival audit of the Hendersonville home. The goal was simple: preserve what remained, digitize every scrap of history, and prepare it for future generations. The team brought in wasn't made up of strangers. It included Cash family friends, historians who had worked on Johnny's museum exhibits, and one young preservationist named Ellie, who had grown up listening to Cash records with her grandfather. While sifting through boxes of lyrics, vintage microphones, and dusty reel-to-reels, Ellie opened the drawer everyone else had skipped for years. Inside, buried beneath layers of linen and old letters, was a small wooden box, carved. Simple, worn smooth on the edges from years of handling. She lifted the lid carefully. Inside, an unlabeled cassette tape, its plastic cracked from age, its magnetic ribbon still intact. At first, no one knew what it was. It wasn't marked. No dates, no song titles, but something about it felt important, reverent. They brought it to the small studio room upstairs, where Johnny used to write. They powered up an old player. As the tape spun and the hiss filled the room, the first sound they heard was Johnny's voice. Not the commanding baritone the world knew. This voice was softer, shaky. "June," he said. Just that one word. And then silence, then breath, then a whisper. Then music. As the minutes ticked by, everyone in the room went still. Ellie wiped away tears. The engineer lowered his head. It wasn't just a song. It wasn't even a performance. It was a man unraveling and rebuilding himself in real time. And though they didn't know it yet, they were listening to something that had never been meant for anyone but one woman. Something so personal, so haunting, so achingly intimate that playing it out loud felt almost like trespassing. But no one stopped the tape. They listened to every second. And when it ended, they sat in silence. The air felt heavy, changed. Because this wasn't an unreleased track. It was the lost voice of Johnny Cash. No backup band, no crowd, no armor. Just the sound of a man who had loved, lost, and left behind the one message he couldn't bring himself to say out loud. And after all these years, it had finally been heard. The tape begins with the quiet hum of a room. There's no music at first, just the faint rustle of clothing, the creak of a chair, and the slight scratch of Johnny's breath as he leans toward the recorder. Then, softly, his voice cuts through the silence. June, spoken not like a name, but like a plea. What follows isn't structured like a song or a speech. It's fragmented, tender, and raw, like a man peeling back his soul in real time. He begins with a melody, a few lines from Ring of Fire, but he changes the words. Instead of the familiar lyrics, he murmurs something only she would understand. In the fire you caught me, in the flames you stayed, even when I ran. His voice trembles, and then he stops singing altogether. There's a long pause. Then he speaks, not to the microphone, but to her. I never knew how to say thank you, he says. Not the way you deserved it. You gave me more than a second chance. You gave me back to myself. He talks about the first time he saw her, her smile backstage, her laugh when he forgot the lyrics, how he knew then that no woman could ever hold him like she could. He admits things he never shared publicly, the pain he caused, the nights he nearly didn't come home, the anger that sat in him like a shadow. I wasn't always kind, he confesses. I wasn't always honest, but I loved you, like the earth loves the rain, needing it, but never knowing how to ask for it. Then, out of nowhere, he begins to hum, a low, soft melody no one had heard before. Not recorded, not released. It has no lyrics, just sound, gentle, almost lullaby-like. Afterward, he speaks again, this time more vulnerable than ever. If this is the last thing I ever say, he whispers, let it be that I loved you, more than the music, more than the applause, more than the man they thought I was. His voice cracks. You can hear him take a moment, a long breath, as if gathering courage to say what comes next. He reads a poem, not a polished one, just words scribbled from the heart. Lines like, "You saw me when I didn't know who I was. You forgave the verses I never wrote. You stayed when the lights went out." He pauses again. The tape clicks softly, as if he shifts in his seat. Then comes the guitar, soft, hesitant strumming. Not a song anyone recognizes, a secret melody, maybe unfinished, maybe meant only for her. He plays it slowly, like a conversation with chords, then stops. "Don't let them hear this till we're both gone," he says near the end. "It's only for your heart." And then silence. No grand finale, no final statement, just the gentle hum of a man who had spent a lifetime searching for peace, and in that moment had found it. When the tape was over, everyone who heard it said the same thing. It didn't feel like a recording. It felt like a haunting, not of ghosts, but of love so deep it refused to be buried. A love that lived in secret for 20 years, waiting for the world to be still enough to hear it. The moment the tape finished playing, the room remained silent. No one spoke. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because they knew what it meant. This wasn't just a lost recording. It was sacred, personal, a direct line into the soul of a man who rarely let the world see behind the curtain. The preservation team debated what to do. Legally, the tape belonged to the Cash estate. Emotionally, it belonged to June. But spiritually, it belonged to something deeper. Something that didn't fit inside contracts, copyrights, or museum displays. When Roseanne Cash, Johnny's daughter, was brought in to hear it, she reportedly wept halfway through. She clutched her mother's letters as Johnny's voice filled the room, and when it ended, she said only one thing: "This was my father's last gift to my mother, and it's not for sale." Word of the discovery began to spread quietly among music historians and journalists. Whispers of a hidden tape, something devastatingly beautiful, began to circle in Nashville. Soon, offers came pouring in. Music executives proposed exclusive releases, complete with documentaries and posthumous duets. Private collectors offered seven-figure sums to own the master tape. Archivists pleaded for it to be made public for the sake of music history. But the family stood firm. This wasn't for profit. This wasn't for the charts. And it wasn't for the headlines. For nearly a year, they kept it locked away again, this time with a deeper understanding of what it truly was. There were disagreements. Some believed that Johnny, in his heart, would have wanted the world to hear his most honest moment. Others argued that June's silence was proof that it was never meant to be shared. The final decision came in the form of a compromise. In a private tribute concert in Hendersonville, on what would have been Johnny and June's wedding anniversary, a portion of the tape was played. Not broadcast, not recorded, not commercialized. Just played. In a darkened room filled with friends, family, and a few selected artists. The lights were low. The audience was still. And Johnny's voice echoed through the speakers one last time. Not as the man in black, not as an outlaw icon, but as a man who had only ever wanted to be understood by the one woman who truly saw him. The reaction was overwhelming. Grown men cried. Women clutched their hearts. No one moved. And when the tape ended, no one clapped. They just stood there, quiet, reverent, as if they had just walked through the center of someone's soul. Afterward, the tape was returned to its original box, sealed, and placed into the Cash family archive. Not for display, not for release. Just kept safe. Because some songs are too powerful for the world to own. Some voices are too human to be sold, and some love stories are meant to be whispered, not shouted. Today, the tape remains where it belongs, sealed, protected, and quietly beating at the heart of the Johnny Cash legacy. Not behind glass in a museum, not digitized for mass streaming, but held close, like a sacred vow never meant to be broken. It is not a relic of fame, but a relic of love. Because when the lights go down and the crowds fade, what remains of any artist isn't the record sold or the awards won. It's the truth they carried when no one was watching. For Johnny Cash, that truth lived on a single tape, one he recorded not for the world, but for one woman, June. And what makes it so powerful isn't the music or the words. It's the silence between them, the breath he takes before saying her name, the hesitation in his voice, the vulnerability of a man who had nothing left to prove and yet still felt the need to explain himself to the person he loved most. That's not performance. That's soul. And in a world that so often demands spectacle, the tape stands as a quiet act of rebellion. A reminder that some of the most beautiful things are the ones we never see. For June, hiding the tape wasn't an act of secrecy. It was an act of love, of protection. She knew the world would one day come looking for it, but she also knew that timing is everything. And maybe, just maybe, she understood that the world had to lose both of them before it could truly understand what they had together. The legend of Johnny Cash is often told in black and white. Rebel, outlaw, saint, sinner. But in that tape, we see the colors, the fragile hues of a man afraid of death, yet desperate to leave behind something real. A man haunted by his past, but anchored by a woman who never let go. A man who walked the line not for fame, but for love. And that's what makes this story unforgettable. Not the fame, not the discovery, but the simple, human truth at the center of it all. That love, when it's real, doesn't always live in the spotlight. Sometimes it waits in silence. Sometimes it hides in drawers. Sometimes it's wrapped in linen and left untouched for decades. But when it's finally heard, it changes everything. Johnny Cash sang for millions, but his final song, his realest, most broken, most beautiful song, was for one. And in the end, maybe that's the only audience that ever really mattered. So when you think of Johnny Cash, don't just remember the outlaw or the icon. Remember the man who whispered June into a recorder one quiet afternoon. The man who laid his soul bare, not for applause, but for forgiveness, for gratitude, for love. Because behind every great man, there's a greater love story. And sometimes, the greatest ones are the ones we were never supposed to hear.